waits. My name is Teresa Schultz. I'm a psychotherapist. One of the strangest cases I ever dealt with was that of Melissa Hall. A friend recommended me to her, and she came for therapy that fall. I rent a consulting room just by Harley Street in London, so my clients tend to be well off. Melissa was a banker. She was stylish and wore expensive but tasteful clothes, understated in the way the polite rich have. I usually open with a simple, so, but sometimes people take a while to talk. She was one of those. She hesitated a long time as if gathering her thoughts or her courage. Then she said, "I know you think me silly," and stopped, almost as if frightened to go on. I felt like saying that I'd heard some very strange things, and I doubted that anything could shock me. Or at least I believed that before I met Melissa. Eventually she said, "It's a dream. I've had it for years, and it keeps coming back." I sat there in the relaxed and interested silence that we therapists practice so hard to maintain, but she still waited. "Go on," I said finally. "I'm interested." And I offered her some water. She drank it, then said, "It's a nice place here, a nice address, near Harley Street." I smiled and said, "I think you're avoiding telling me about your dream," but she kept avoiding. She said, "I'm from London, but you're not. You're American by your accent. From New York, but I've been here several years now." She laughed, a nervous sound, but continued, "Yes, the dream. It's taken me such a lot of courage to come here. I don't want to mess it up by being too scared to tell you." She looked at me as if seeking reassurance. I smiled and shrugged. It was up to her whether she told me or not. "It goes back to when I was at school. I came from a poor area in East London, south of the river. I couldn't always afford clothes like this. My father was a van driver, my mother worked in a button factory. At least we had lots of buttons," she laughed. I waited. "So anyway, my primary school, that dream didn't come until after I'd left. I was about 15 when I first had it." "Describe it." "Well, I'm back at school. There's an eerie atmosphere, as if we know something awful is going to happen. The children are in the classroom standing around, not knowing what to do. The teachers..." She shuddered and put her hand to her face, but she got her courage. "I don't like talking about this." "You're doing fine, but you can stop whenever you want." "No, I don't want to stop." "The teachers are all locked in the staff room. They've locked themselves in, looking out through the window into the classroom, but they're locked in, as if they're not going to help. There are 10 of us in the classroom." "You seem very precise about that." "No, definitely 10. I know them all. Anyway, the teachers are just staring at us in some kind of dreadful, helpless horror. They know what's going to happen, but they can't do anything about it. And the kids are there too. We know something's coming, but we're bewildered. We're only kids. How can we stop it?" She was shaking. I put my hand out to touch hers, to comfort her. "If it's too painful, stop. We can talk about it next time." "No, I can't stop. I've stirred it up by talking about it. I can't lock it back up." I sat there in what I hoped was an encouraging and supportive quiet. I wanted her to know I was there for her, professionally, as her therapist. Falteringly, she started again. "And then the door to the classroom opens behind us. I don't see what it is at first, but I'm looking at Tom Morton. He has such terror on his face. I've never seen anything like it. He's looking at the door, looking at what comes in, and everything's slow. The children try to run. I see the teachers turning away, almost embarrassed that they're going to let this thing happen. And Tommy's screaming, but it's slowed down like a tape. I sense something behind me. Something comes in through the door. The other children can see it, and they're screaming, terrified. They try to run, but they're so slow. And there are no doors out anyway, only the one that's opened, and the one into the teacher's room that they've locked shut. I sense this thing behind me. And then I see its hands reaching to take Tommy, and then I wake up. And I'm always terrified. I'm shaking, and I put all the lights on, and I'm too scared to sleep again. "So, you don't see this thing?" She shook her head. She was crying, slight, frightened sobs. I handed her a tissue, and she wiped her eyes. What about the hands? What were they like? She shook her head again. I don't know. I can't remember. Maybe they weren't hands. It's as if it's too frightening to remember. She laughed. Stupid, aren't I? Not at all. So what happened to Tom Morton in real life? I never saw him again. Remember, I'd already left my primary school by the time I had the dream first. He went to an old boys' secondary school. So he's okay. No. That's what made me so scared of the dream. He was killed. When? Shortly after I had the dream first. When he was taken in the dream, his death was in the papers. He was run over on a pedestrian crossing. That's sad, I said. She nodded. It is, but it's just a coincidence, of course. You say there with some hesitation. It must be a coincidence. What do you think? I think it must be a coincidence. She smiled. Thank God. But you had the dream again. I did. I would have it once a year, maybe only once every 2 years or even longer. If there was a long gap, I thought I got rid of it and started to be happy, as if a cloud lifted from me, a darkness. But then the dream returned, and I was turned into the same shivering wreck I'd always been. So it was always the same. Mostly, but not quite. Each time it happened, the children were older. They aged with me, so I saw them as adults eventually. But the teachers didn't age. They were just the same. And you never saw the thing that came in. No, I always woke up. But, every time it came, it took one of us. And you thought the person really died. She nodded. Stupid, but it scares me. And did they die? She shrugged. It's now been nearly 20 years since I first had the dream. I've lost contact with them all. I know that my friend Sarah, she was my best friend back then. She died of leukemia, but that's just a coincidence again, isn't it? I nodded, of course. How could it be anything else? What about the others? Well, as I said, I lost contact with them. Why don't you find out? How? Well, mutual friends, Facebook, friends reunited. There are websites for this kind of thing. I don't think anyone can disappear these days. Do you think I should? I said, I use different kinds of therapies, but one of them, a very popular one, is called cognitive behavioral therapy. In this, if we have irrational thoughts, we challenge them. We look for evidence. Sometimes we can set up little experiments to see whether our irrational fears have any basis. So you think I should try to contact them? I'm not pushing you at all, but it would be one way to show that this dream is just a nasty, scary dream. It's not real. It has no power in the real world. She looked hopeful. Her face brightened. That would be so good. I've let this thing dominate my life for too long. She talked to some other things, her mother, her friends. She had never married, but had a good social life, spending the money she earned on skiing trips and scuba diving in the Maldives. I arranged I would see her the next week. That night, I was home on time for a change. My husband, Michael, made me dinner and we sat down with a nice bottle of French wine. Good day, he asked. Yeah, okay, I smiled. I had a weird case. You know, it's usually anxiety and depression, but this time it's a woman who has a recurring dream. One that bothers her, he said without looking up. Sure, lots. I told him the gist of the dream. Creepy, he said. What's the matter with her? Well, I think she has a psychosis, just it's contained in the dream so it doesn't erupt into her life. The dream's very therapeutic, really. Stops her going crazy for real. Like an abscess, the body keeps all the poison wrapped up in a neat bubble. Michael's a doctor. He thinks bodies, I think minds. Like that, I agreed. So what are you going to do? Well, I'm not going to dig too much. Just stay on the surface and maybe try out some behavioral experiments so she can challenge her fears with evidence. Sounds good. More wine? Always more wine, Michael. You know me. The next week, Melissa came back. If anything, she was worse than the first week, but she didn't hesitate before talking. She accepted the water, and then when we sat down, she said, So, I looked people up. I did what you said. I joined the Classmates Reunited sites and checked out Friends of Friends on Facebook. And I didn't find out about everyone. Of course, some may have left the country. Sure. Her complexion was grey. So, did it help? I prompted. Did it show you that when they disappear in a dream, they don't disappear in life? She shook her head. Not really. I didn't manage to find anyone of the 10 who was in that class with me. I waited for her to go on. But I found people who knew about some of them. And what did they say? She looked terrified. They've gone. The ones I managed to trace are all dead. That can't be. It is. And I'm sure that they died just after I dreamt they were taken in that room. But that isn't rational. I began to wonder if talking to me about the dream had in some way unlocked the psychosis. They couldn't all be dead, but it was certain she believed they were and that their deaths were connected to her dream. I considered referring her to a psychiatrist I knew who could prescribe some antipsychotic medication. She blurted, "You've got to help me." Unusually for me, I tend to keep the distance, but I was moved by the emotional state she was in. I took her hand and stroked it like a mother might. "I will. Listen, this'll all be okay. It's just a nightmare. It can't have any effect on the real world. If some of your friends are dead, then it's a sad coincidence. Others of them will be in Australia or California enjoying the sunshine. Don't worry." "But it's worse than I told you." "Why?" I tried to sound comforting, but I was seriously worried about her mental state. "It's worse because they're all gone. I'm the only one left in the room. The next time I dream it, they'll take me." She broke down into horror-stricken sobbing. She was almost coughing with the depths of her sobs. I tried to comfort her as best I could. I'm not a big believer in medication, but I thought a dose of Valium right now would help her. I told her I would get something, and I went over to the landline and rang my psychiatrist friend Martin. He has a surgery just on Harley Street. He is a very expensive doctor, but we get on well. He was free and he agreed to come over. He wrote her up for something that would help her nerves and help her sleep. She hadn't been sleeping until exhaustion dragged her there every night. She was scared of dreaming. As I said, I think medication has its place, but the real cure for these fears is to face them. We arranged to meet in 2 days. She was grateful and thanked me as she left my consulting room. I was going to set up an experiment. She had told me the name of the school, and by looking on the internet, I saw that it still existed. I thought if we could go there in the cold light of day, and she could see it was only a school, just an ordinary school, that would help take away the supernatural dread that haunted her. I learned, in fact, that the school was shut. It was due to be sold off for redevelopment into executive homes, but it was still owned by the local borough council. After spending what seemed hours on the phone and talking to a string of people, I finally got hold of the school's headmistress. The story was that the council was selling off the old building and was using the money to fund a new one. The kids had already moved, but the headmistress had the keys to the old place. I explained who I was and explained Melissa's story. She was interested. I mentioned no names because of client confidentiality. Of course, she didn't know her. She'd only been there 7 years. She was very reluctant. I said, if we could just have the keys so that she can go into the old classroom and see that it's just a room, that there's nothing fearful about it. She hesitated. "I'm not sure. There's no insurance." I said, "We're both professional women. We're not going to have a party. It'll be fine. And of course, if there's anything your new school needs by way of a small donation, books perhaps, sports equipment, well, the football team does need a new strip. Fine, I'll pay for that." The truth was I was going to be a little out of pocket, but I wanted to help Melissa. She was in such a state, and I must admit I'd become curious myself. I believed in my therapies, and I knew it would cure her. When I was home, Michael had cooked again. He supported me as he always did. "So, what's the plan?" "Well, I want to get the keys and just spend some time there." "Sure." I thought, overnight. "Overnight?" He was incredulous. "Why do you need to go there overnight?" "I want her to sleep there and dream there. And even if she has the dream, especially if she has the dream, it'll prove to her there's no basis for her fears. They call it immersion. It's a technique, and it works." He shrugged. "You know best, but if it was me..." "It's not you. I'm going to cure this girl. Okay, but keep your cell phone on. Do you have a date for going there? I nodded. When I told Melissa, she started shaking. I said, listen, hon, it's the only way. We've got to get you through this. Trust me. It's a tried and tested technique. You need to be free of this. But to stay there, to sleep there, to dream, to prove it's nonsense. Oh God, I'm so scared. I put my hand on hers. Trust me, Melissa. I'm going to make you better. When the time finally came, I drove Melissa to the school. It was still light. The area was poor and broken down. She said, I haven't been here since my mother died. No reason to. I'd forgotten how dirty it was. It's just a poor working class area. Nothing wrong with that. That it? I pointed to a red brick Victorian building. It was obviously a school, but there was a for sale sign up that had a sold poster pasted across. She stiffened and nodded. Okay, I've got the keys. I parked pretty much outside. The area was quiet. Newspapers blew down the gutters. A stray cat walked across the road. Two youths stood on the street corner, hoods up, smoking, watching my BMW. Just a sec. I got out, engine still running, and stepped up to the metal gates. There was a heavy chain round them, which I unlocked. I pushed the gates open, then I went back to the car. I drove it through into the yard and locked the gates behind us. At least that would keep them from stealing my car. Melissa got out and just stared up at the dirty windows of the old building. I had some nice times here when I was a kid, she said. See, I said, here, help me with these. I had come well prepared. I had 2 sleeping bags, 2 air mattresses, an iPod docking station, and an electric fire. I had insisted that the headmistress switch on the electricity supply, even if she wouldn't agree to heat the whole school. She agreed and said that was fair enough. Melissa helped me in with the stuff. Lugging it seemed to distract her and help her mood. Where's the classroom? I said. She pointed up the stairs. Up there, first floor. First floor. Then I remembered Europeans call the real first floor the ground floor, so their first floor is really the second. I knew that. Okay, I said, up we go. The classroom was locked, but the headmistress had given me a big bunch of keys. I searched through them till I found the right one. Inside, I switched on the electric light. Jesus, it just looks the same, she said. There were a few desks still in the room, and the kids' chairs pushed up against the wall in a big pile. There was indeed a kind of teacher's observation room with a door leading off and a window so they could see what the kids were doing. I went in. There was a sink and a dead mouse on the floor. The water was still on. I pushed the mouse to the side with my foot. I'm not going to sleep here. I can't, said Melissa. What did I say about trusting me? Anyway, I've come prepared. Look. I pulled out the hip flask that Michael had bought me for when we went country walking in the English shires. Brandy, I said. And soon we made the place cozy. I put the heater on, we laid the mattresses on the floor after finding a brush and sweeping it, and we put the sleeping bags on top of them. I put on the iPod, and soon we were listening to silly, happy pop music and talking about places we'd been. And I told her about the old boyfriend I'd really loved who was a painter. That was before I met Michael. And then I noticed her eyes beginning to get heavy. The brandy and my reassuring company were doing the trick. I turned the music off. She was breathing lightly, eyes closed, and then it was just a question of sleeping till the morning. I left the light on in the classroom to reassure her if she woke up. I was making a big enough donation they could afford to leave one lousy electric light bulb burning all night. I went and brushed my teeth in the sink. I would have to do without a shower, but it was for a good cause. As quietly as I could, I got into my sleeping bag beside Melissa. She was flat out, and then I dozed and slept. When I awoke, it had that feeling of the middle of the night. The light was still on. Melissa was deep asleep. I lay there, and I heard the annoying drip, drip, drip of the tap in the teacher's adjoining room. I hadn't turned it off properly. I got up in my pajamas and went to fix it. As I got into the room with its dripping tap and dead mouse, the door clicked shut behind me. It was on a latch on the other side. There was a keyhole this side, but I left a bunch of keys with my stuff beside the sleeping Melissa. I looked through the glass. I was debating whether I should thump it and wake her up or just wait it out till morning. And then The atmosphere grew strange. I got scared. I turned to look at the classroom door. It was opening, slowly but deliberately. From where I was, I couldn't see what was opening the door, but a rush of helpless fear kept me staring, knowing I couldn't help. I watched as the door opened, still hiding what was behind it. Hiding who was pushing it. I saw Melissa wake suddenly. I saw her mouth open to scream, but the noise was muted behind the glass panel. I saw her turn and see the door opening. She looked at me wordlessly, begging for my help. I saw her nightmare come into the room and crawl towards her. Reaching with its black, twisted hands. She tried to fight it, tried to push it off, but she couldn't. It enveloped her. I saw its pointed fingernails and long, ragged hair flapping in the unfelt wind. I must have fainted or passed out in terror. When I woke, it was day. I was still in the adjoining room. I found an old-fashioned iron, a solid block of metal dating from around 1910, and I smashed the lock off. Melissa wasn't there. Nothing of her was there. I ran round the school looking and yelling in every room and every corridor, but she was gone. It had taken her. I never saw Melissa Hall again. I was investigated by the police, but it was obvious I'd committed no crime. Thanks to Michael's job and my insurance, I could afford to take a year off. After that, it felt better. I even started working again. I don't like to sleep anymore. Not now. Because I've dreamed of it. In my dream, I'm sitting in my consulting room, just like I had been with Melissa. But she's gone. Then, I see the door opening.
So that was He Waits, which I wrote ages ago. There's a story, of course, behind it, as you might guess. Long time ago, I used to run an events company, and we ended up specializing in going to haunted houses and castles and things like that. And part of the night was I would walk them around and tell them stories, the purported true stories of the place. And part of the night would be we would eat dinner and people would tell their own stories. And that was actually a really cool part because people came from, at that time, from all over, mainly the UK and Ireland when we were in Ireland. And they would tell the stories of what happened. And I heard some very strange experiences that people around the table told me. Now, you might say, did I believe them? Well, some I didn't. A surprising amount, actually, I at least believed that these people were sincere, that they really had had these experiences, okay? And they believed it. And the stories were so complex that it persuaded me that it probably had happened in that way. I'm pretty open-minded about these things, being honest, laying my cards on the table. I've had some pretty strange experiences myself, so I'm not a skeptic. I don't believe just because I have never had an experience, nobody can ever have had that experience. I believe that there are more things in heaven and earth than I dreamt of in thy philosophy, Horatio. So this particular story, He Waits, came from two sources really, but the main source was a girl who was there with I think they were just married, and she told me about this dream she'd been having, pretty much like this, that she had a dream of her primary school, and each time she dreamed it, everybody was older. But, you know, she would have this dream every year or two, and in the dream, the people she was at school with would be there, would be a bit older. And the teachers were there, but the teachers didn't get any older. Now, That's source number one for it. That's a pretty weird dream. So, yeah, so the story came from this woman's dream, this recurring dream of her classroom. She was pretty scared of it as well, because she said that every time she dreamed, one of them was missing. And she was frightened that the next time whoever it was came from them, it would be her turn. But the second source is a story by E.F. Benson, which I've recorded for the Classic Ghost Stories podcast, although I really need to redo it because it was done on a poor microphone. So this E.F. Benson story, this guy, it's really two stories in one. It's a vampire story, but the main theme is this recurring dream. He dreams about this house and these people, and he continues to dream about them year after year. And they get older, and some of them die and disappear. And then, of course, he ends up many years later, completely by chance, visiting this place. He's invited by a friend for a country house weekend, as they used to have in those days. They probably still do. I just don't get invited to them. And I suppose there's a third source to this. When I was a little boy, I had a lot of trouble with my tonsils and adenoids, and I remember going to have the operation and have them removed. And I remember sitting in a room with a lot of other kids being read a story. And in this story, every now and again, somebody would come in and take one of them. And I knew that it was going to be my turn. We were all lined up. It was like a production line. And we're on this, we were on a bench, I think, in my memory. And from the right, they were lifting and removing these kids who did not come back. So that was pretty scary. And then it was my turn, and they came and got me. And I went and had my tonsils and adenoids out under general anesthetic. And I woke up in this hospital ward, and everybody was crying. All the kids were crying, and I thought, well, I feel all right, actually. And then I thought, oh, well, I might as well join in. So I did. I cried. So they are. That is He Waits. Why is she American? I don't know. Why is she American? That story. Now, for those of you who don't like sound effects, that story is available without sound effects in the audiobook London Horror Stories, because it's set in London, set in Mile End, I think. I lived in London, obviously, for quite a long time. And and London Horror Stories is my homage to my time in London, to the places that I liked there and loved there. So I tried to set a story in each of the places I liked. I have a love-hate relationship with Mile End, but never mind. Okay, so there we are. Okay, right. Hope you liked it. If you didn't like it with the sound effects, there is a version available for purchase through wherever you get your audiobooks.